I'm Norma Percy. What I do is to try and show on television what it's like inside the room when the really big political decisions are taken. Usually that means big international crises like the fall of the Soviet Union or the Arab-Israeli conflict. But once we took as our subject the worst scandal in American history. 50 years ago this week, it led to the resignation of President Richard Nixon and left a legacy of mistrust between Americans and their politicians that's lasted until today. It's called Watergate. One morning in the early 1990s, a young colleague burst into the office of our small independent TV production company, really all excited. "I've got a brilliant idea for a series. Did you know, 20 years ago, a group of Cuban Americans working for the committee to re-elect President Nixon were caught breaking in to their opponent's headquarters in the Watergate building in order to steal campaign secrets. It would make a terrific television series." My boss, Brian Lapping, and I looked at each other and smiled ruefully. Congress's attempt to pin the break-in on President Nixon had dominated the television screens in both sides of the Atlantic. But his enthusiasm was infectious. So soon, Watergate expert Fred Emery and producer-director Paul Mitchell and I were off to America. We had an amazing year of meeting extraordinary villains. The hardest to persuade was Nixon's powerful chief of staff, H.R. Haldeman. He flatly refused any interviews on Watergate. But we discovered that Haldeman had daily meetings with the president, where he wrote down everything he was told in highly legible shorthand on yellow legal pads. These yellow pads were now available in the archive, and so we managed to persuade Haldeman that we didn't want an interview, we wanted him just to read out the key bits from the yellow pads, and of course explain them a little bit. The explanations began to seem a bit more like like an interview.
I got a call from the president from Camp David, and the White House operator got me on the phone, and there was a long delay before finally the president came on in a very muffled, downbeat voice and said, "I was wondering if you could get up here at 1:30 today."
Bob Haldeman called me and said, "The president wants to see us." I said, "What's up?" He says he's decided to fire us.
The real star of the show was Gordon Liddy, a flamboyant character, a show-off villain with a unique, sense of humor about himself.
I put him completely in the picture in a way so that he, being knowledgeable about these things, Dean could attempt to control the investigation and thereby the damage. I then finally said to him something that disturbed Dean. I had in my head knowledge which could bring down a president of the United States.
Liddy gave an extraordinary 9-hour interview to series director Mick Gold. He was frank and amusing about some of the pranks he got up to, but rather hazy about who had ordered him to do it. Jeb Magruder, he was the liaison between the White House and the committee to re-elect the president, amazingly known as its acronym CREEP. When Magruder was in jail, he got religion, and when he came out, he became a Protestant minister. So he was somewhat reluctant to talk about some of the murkier things he was up to in the White House. Well, I showed him some of the things that Gordon Liddy had said about him on film and suggested it would be rather better if he was the person who told the story himself. He was outraged, but, well, 2 days later, his office rang up and said, on reflection, Reverend Magruder thought he would take part in the program. He did have a condition. We had to film him in his church in Kentucky in full clerical regalia.
They realized that it wasn't just Jeb and John Dean and Gordon Liddy, it was John Mitchell, it was Bob Haldeman, it was, half the people in the White House and at the Committee to Re-elect, and maybe even the President of the United States.
My favorite interviewee was Fred LaRue. LaRue was one of the 3 men at the crucial meeting at Nixon's Florida retreat that gave the go-ahead to Liddy's project. In his first interview since he spoke to the Senate Watergate Committee back in the 70s, LaRue intimated that Attorney General John Mitchell, one of Nixon's closest friends, had given the go-ahead to Watergate.
I've reflected on this many times, and at the Key Biscayne meeting, or even after that, had I gone to Mitchell and said, John, this is crazy. I mean, this is a harebrained scheme. It's not going to do a damn thing but get us in trouble. Let's put a stop to it. If you have to, go to the White House and back them off the damn thing. Had I done that and done it forcefully, John would have listened to me. And he would have done that, and this whole mess could have been avoided. It's one of the real regrets I have about Watergate.
We were getting close to Nixon, but not quite close enough. After weeks in the archive, we found something in Haldeman's many files, an innocent-looking briefing note from one of his staff, which said, Gordon Liddy's intelligence operation has been approved. Now you may want to cover with Mitchell, who will be privy to the information. Eureka! We had recovered the only remaining written evidence that the White House knew that Liddy's plan had been approved. The FBI couldn't find it, the Senate committee couldn't find it, and we found it. John Dean himself explained to me what it meant.
This is a truly amazing document to surface at this late date. If Haldeman knew about this, there is no doubt in my mind that Richard Nixon knew about this, because everything that Haldeman knew, he knew for the sake of Richard Nixon. And it's just inconceivable to me that this type of information, which Nixon loved, would not be shared with him.
We had the scoop that made the series. The story is so wonderfully bizarre. If it was fiction, you'd never believe it. That's what's so wonderful about documentaries. So, you've got to watch all 5 episodes in order to get every nuance, from break-in to cover-up to exposure and resignation. Enjoy.